The first task this morning actually is for me to, first of all, maybe introduce myself. Maybe not everybody knows me. My name is Pádraig Dalton, and I'm the Director General of the CSO in Ireland. But I'm also Chair of the high-level group on the modernisation of statistical production and services. I suppose the first task this morning is to present the annual report of HLG MOS to the CES. So we will start with that. So hopefully this is working. Okay, so what I want to talk about this morning really is to very quickly look at the environmental context, just look at modernisation in its broadest perspective, talk a little bit about collaboration and the central role that collaboration is playing in the global modernisation agenda, talk about the modernisation activities of HLG MOS, past activities, past achievements, but also the work that's currently ongoing within HLG MOS. And then finally just talk about a couple of the modernisation challenges that we're facing, and I think some of them were surfaced yesterday during the discussion on SDGs. So the environmental context, and I think we've rehearsed this several times, so I'm going to go through this quite quickly, but I don't know how the rest of you feel, but for me the only constant these days appears to be change. And I think what's particularly different, there's always change, but I think it's the pace of change that's a particular issue of note at the moment. I suppose the big issue for us is how do we keep pace with the change in the environment in which we're working. And if we're not keeping pace, we're falling behind. So I think that's a challenge for all of us. We've all seen increased user demand, and it's not just the increase in the users and the demand from users, it's the increase in the complexity and depth of analysis that users are looking for. And I think that's putting additional pressures on all of us, and the demand for increased levels of disaggregation and the challenges that presents for sample surveys and pushing us towards secondary data sources. So these are all big issues that we need to grapple with. Of course, the emergence of the global user is of particular importance, and I think our discussion yesterday on SDGs is particularly relevant in this regard, because you can produce statistics, but the most important thing is produce statistics that are comparable across countries. And that's a particular challenge. Anybody can produce data, but producing comparable data, well, that's a different issue. And that's not always down to technical issues, that can be down to institutional issues as well, and institutional frameworks. Of course, we're all familiar with the digital age, I suppose the range of new technology that's now at our disposal, and I suppose the pace at which technology is changing. New data sources, and everybody talks about big data, but we shouldn't forget administrative data, and we shouldn't forget other private data sources like credit card data from the banking system, and how that can support the compilation of official statistics. I think there's also a huge skills challenge for us. I think reprofiling is something that we all talk about, or certainly some of us are talking about in our organisations, and that's to reflect certainly my own organisation. It's the shift from the exploitation only of primary data sources to moving to the compilation of official statistics based on primary and secondary data sources. And with the shift to secondary data sources comes a shift in methodological approaches, a shift in IT, and new skill sets and a new profile for our people in our organisations. And of course then there's the whole issue of outsourcing, and I think this is particularly relevant on the technology side. Can you grow your own across all the various range of technology requirements? Can you do that inside in your own organisation, or should we now be looking at outsourcing to a much greater extent? And in what areas should we be outsourcing? And what are the advantages of outsourcing, but also what are the risks of outsourcing? I think the availability of skills is a big issue, and particularly on big data. Hadoop technology is now the technology of choice in relation to big data, but the range of people and the number of people with those types of skill sets is quite limited, and we're competing with big private sector organisations, the likes of Google, Facebook. They're all looking for the same staff as we are now, and I think that's a big challenge for us. So it's very hard for us to compete on wages and salaries, but we can compete on job satisfaction and access to data, and I think that's something that we're trying to do in Ireland, is try and recruit data scientists, but sell the opportunity of working with big data sources, sell the the benefit of having 2 or 3 years in an NSI on your CV, and things like that I think are beginning to pay dividends. So people aren't always just motivated by pay, they're actually motivated by challenging work, and they're the kind of people you want. And I think the last issue that the environmental context, this whole issue of politicisation, I think the economic crisis has thrown us into a new world where official statistics are now front and centre. The awareness and the importance of data for policy has grown significantly, and of course the focus on targets and indicators is a positive, but there's also a downside, because when you start setting targets, then you run the risk of people playing games with figures, and that's where we need to be strong. And I think that was something that was reflected by our colleague from Mexico yesterday, where he spoke about the need to engage appropriately. So modernisation in its broadest perspective, and I think the common perception, and it's probably appropriate, is that modernisation is about technology, it's about big data, about CSPA. I hope everybody's familiar with CSPA, but the Common Statistical Production Architecture. So it's an architecture that supports plug and play, data visualization, and these are all these are undoubtedly all technology and modernisation challenges. But modernisation is much more than that. And I think modernisation is a relative term, and the example I'll give you is that in my own country we're trying to exploit administrative data now to a much greater extent. We're really shifting from primary to secondary data sources, but our colleagues in Denmark and some of the Scandinavian countries did this 30 years ago. So it's not modernisation to them, but it's modernisation to us. So I think that relativity is something that we need to be conscious of in terms of modernisation, and it's very much reflecting your starting point. But we all are moving in the same direction. I think that's what's important. So from our perspective, I think we need to broaden our understanding of what modernisation means, and we also need to broaden our minds about what it will take to modernise, because it's not just about tackling hard technical challenges. I think Pádraig mentioned it yesterday. It's about statistical leadership. I think leadership in the current environment is extremely important. So collaboration is the key. There are many active participants on the modernisation front globally. We have the NSIs, we have the UNECE, Eurostat, UNSD, OECD, IMF, I could go on. Nearly everybody these days is talking about modernisation. And by the way, I don't like the word modernisation in one sense, because it almost sounds like it's something that's going to happen for a finite period and then it's done. It's not. It's continuous improvement is what it is. Modernisation is just a buzzword for continuous improvement. It's always been there. But I think one of the things we need to reflect on is that if you think about the environmental context that I outlined at the start, I think the risk is that individually we'll all develop our own strategies to address some of these challenges, and I think that's appropriate. We should all have our strategies. But I think if we're going to meet the challenges that we've set out, we're going to have to work together. We can't all invent the wheel. We have to work together to learn from each other's experiences, to exploit each other's technology, to exploit each other's applications, to exploit and use each other's methodologies, because I think that's the most efficient and effective way for us to move forward. That's easy to say, but it's actually quite difficult to do. But I think it's what we must do, and I think it's what we will do. I think at a global level, one of the best examples of this international collaboration is the UNECE HLG MOS. And I always like to think of it as a collaboration of the willing. Every November we have the annual workshop of the HLG MOS, and it's really uplifting, I think, to go into that room, because the energy inside in the room is incredible. You're in a room with innovators and with people who want to be there and who want to change things, and that's fantastic. And it's infectious. So very quickly, for those of you who might know about the UNECE HLG MOS, it was created in 2010. The strategic vision was endorsed by the CES here in 2011-2012. And at a high level, its role is to oversee and coordinate international work on modernisation of official statistics. The HLG itself is comprised of 11 heads of national and international statistical organisations, and the countries involved and the institutions involved are listed there. But actually, that's not what it's about at all. The HLG MOS, the formal membership of the HLG is only at the tip of the iceberg. At the moment, within the framework of the UNECE HLG MOS, there are approximately 500 professional statisticians across 40 countries and the 5 continents involved in HLG activities. So it's truly a global activity, and this is just a very quick visual representation of the countries involved, and I think perhaps even at this stage I think another few could be added to that. So it's truly a global activity. So very quickly, what's the HLG MOS all about? And the HLG MOS is about tangible deliverables. Projects last 12 months at most. So the whole idea is that at the end of a 12-month period you have something tangible and you have delivered. And that's very important for the work of the HLG. So some of the achievements are well, it's easier to say it, GAMSO, the Generic Activity Model for Statistical Organizations. And this is a really useful model for modernization. And again, it's something that a lot of organizations are using now to frame their thinking around modernization. And that was launched in New York on the 1st of March. The HLG have developed guidelines on privacy, on partnerships and quality issues relating to big data. And I think we'll hear a lot about that today, and I think Dino is going to talk quite a bit about this, and I think it's something that a lot of us are experiencing, this emerging issue between the need to access sensitive data for the compilation of official statistics, and at the same time the data protection world and the new environment that has arisen there. The HLG has developed generic skills profiles for data scientists, and we've just launched a competition in Ireland to recruit data scientists, and we've used this skills profile, so it was great that we didn't have to reinvent the wheel. And of course, we're sharing valuable experience and learning from the sandbox experiments. And the sandbox is, as it sounds, it's for kids. It's a place to play, but it's a place to play with big data, and it's an R&D environment that's been created in the Irish Centre for High-End Computing in Dublin. And we have data from all 5 continents, I think, in the sandbox, and we have people from, I think, about 20 countries now playing with data in the sandbox. And it's all about trying to identify what the challenges are with big data and trying to find solutions. So the sandbox is proving extremely important and very beneficial. In the last while, we've developed 8 new CSPA compliant services. So these are services that we can share across National Statistical Institutes once your IT infrastructure is what they call CSPA compliant. Don't ask me the technical question of what that means. Steve will answer that perhaps. And of course, once we develop services, you need to create a catalogue. You need to create a box to put them all in so that you know where to go. And Eurostat, who are one of the key partners in the HLG, are hosting the service catalogue. We can move it on, Gerald. It won't move. There it is. So the plans the plans ahead for us are again with the sandbox. So the big issue this year is to try and produce and release a set of internationally comparable statistics from one or more big data sources. So that's the challenge this year, is to produce an official statistic from a big data source that's internationally comparable, and that's what we want to deliver. We want to create a sustainable model for the future sandbox type shared working environment. And there's a sprint in Ireland starting next Monday morning in Cork, and there are a few people around the room, I think, travelling to Cork for that. But that's just really about creating a sustainable environment where we can continue to do the innovative type work that's required to prepare the path for others to follow when they're ready to follow. And I think it's very important work. There will be new CSPA services developed this year, and as a consequence of that, there will be the enhanced catalogue that Eurostat are hosting. There's sharing of investment plans based on capability enhancements, and this is something that a lot of organisations are doing. And then finally, there's going to be some work on what's called the modernisation maturity model. And this is a roadmap for modernisation. It's to try and set out what are the key issues you need to look at when you're thinking about engaging in a significant modernisation programme. But it's trying to reflect this word maturity. It's trying to suggest that your starting point is incredibly important. But the whole idea of the work of the HLG is about trying to create a roadmap for people to follow when they're ready to follow. So those who can push ahead should push ahead, but there's a social conscience issue required here to ensure that we can leave clear guidelines, clear tools that others can use when they're ready to follow. And I think that's extremely important. That's a responsibility in all of us. So One of the things we have been talking about, though, is the sustainability. And as I mentioned earlier on, we have 500 professional statisticians across 40 countries and 5 continents. So, in a sense, we're becoming victims of our own success. So to manage that range of activity, I think we've been thinking about this from the point of view, is the current structure sustainable? Now, of course, this is a positive thing. We want engagement, and this is extremely positive, but it has implications for our structures, for our governance structures, and perhaps also the need to start engaging in shared agreements. So what might the future look like for the HLG? And we had recent meetings in New York and Canberra where we surfaced some ideas and some thoughts on these issues. So, blue skies in New York, and the exclamation marks are there because we had about 5 inches of snow on that particular day in New York. I think most of you who were in New York in March can remember that. And Canberra, well, Canberra probably had blue skies. I don't know, I wasn't there, but David's giving me the thumbs up, so there were definitely blue skies. But some of the ideas that emerged from those 2 days were, first of all, the need to brand the work of HLG MOS and to brand the products and services that are being developed. So people talk about GSBPM, they talk about GAMSO, they talk about GSIM, but do they know where it's come from? Has it got a brand? Has it got a credibility? Has it got a trust? So I think that, you know, the GSBPM, GAMSO, GSIM has been developed by professional statisticians for professional statisticians. I think it's very important that we brand that so that when somebody goes to look at something and say, okay, CES, UNECE, HLG MOS, or whatever the brand is going to be, but it needs to be clear that it's come from the official statistical world. I think that's very important for all of us. We've been discussing the establishment of a statistical modernization community. And essentially that really is just about formalizing more or less what already exists, informally. So we work in quite an informal way. That's probably unfair, it's more than informal. But I think what we need to do is, because of the scale of the activities, we probably need to formalize it a little bit more. So it's still open to all. All the activities of the HLG are open to everybody to engage with. As I said, it's still a collaboration of the willing, so you don't have to opt in. You don't have to opt out either. But one of the things we're talking about is a statement of intent for subscribers. So those that are going to get involved will probably ask the question, what does it mean? If I get involved, what's expected of me? And I think what we need to do is document what the expectations of subscribers to the HLG work is going to be. And I think that's what we're proposing in a statement of intent. So it's just to identify those expectations. But we also need to provide mechanisms for a deeper engagement on specific issues. And, you know, there are a couple of areas like big data and CSPA where there are a number of institutes who are really pushing ahead, investing a huge amount of time and effort. And I think they need to have a clearer articulation of the responsibilities of the group that are working on those types of activities, and they are going to be embedded in these manifests that will be associated with the statements of intent. So these are just some thoughts as to how we might move it forward. So very quickly, modernization challenges. One of the things I often think about is institutional settings. So I think the absence, in some cases, of a legal institutional setting that guarantees professional, political independence and impartiality, that's a modernization challenge for many countries, and we shouldn't forget it. We shouldn't forget that in many countries the exploitation of administrative data isn't the norm, and yet we know that administrative data has value for official statistical purposes. Big data is still in the ether, it's still developing, and yet all the talk is about big data. And of course we should be focusing on big data, but let's not forget administrative data. So let's be clear about what modernization is, and let's make sure we think about it in its broadest perspective. Standards-based modernization is key because it's all about agreeing standards. But one of the things that worries us in some cases is, have we a role as a statistical community in influencing some of these standards? And one of the standards I might mention would be DDI, the Data Documentation Initiative, which underpins many of the metadata classifications and structures we're using. And yet in the DDI consortium, official statistics, I think, are just one of 7 groups that have an influence there. And in some cases, I would argue that there's some development and changes to standards for development's sake. Sometimes what we need to do is freeze, like we do with UNECE, like we do with ESA. We need to freeze at times so that we can facilitate implementation. I think the exploitation of secondary data sources is extremely important. And as I said, secondary data sources include administrative data, big data, and private data sources. But there are big issues emerging, especially where you're starting to link different data sources. You're linking primary sources with secondary sources. You're linking primary with admin. You're linking primary with big data sources. And the problem is not so much are we legally allowed to do this. In some cases we're not. But even where you're legally allowed to do it, one of the big problems we face is that the big brother perception and the potential of ensuring public trust. Because official statisticians, I think, enjoy a reputation of trust. But you can lose it overnight. And we have a big data project ongoing in Ireland at the minute where we have a legal right to do something. But the Data Protection Commissioner is expressing some concerns without getting off the fence. And the question is, can you move forward without the support of the Data Protection Commissioner? The answer is you could, but is it prudent to do so? So there are big challenges for us in this whole issue of privacy and data protection. And I'm not going to talk too much about it because I think Dino is going to talk a little bit about that at least. Maybe not. You'll try. So, very quickly, modernisation challenges. I think it's important to realise that not all the challenges in modernisation are technical. There are some significant behavioural challenges, and we had a bit of a discussion about this yesterday. One of the challenges we have is behaviour within our own organisations. Trying to drive change in an organisation which hasn't changed for a long number of years can be extremely difficult and frustrating. So it needs strong leadership. I had to fully agree with Pádraig yesterday when he said that. And we need to create an environment where there's an openness to change. And I certainly know that this old saying of culture eats strategy for breakfast is absolutely correct. You can have the best strategy in the world, but if you don't get the buy-in of your staff, we've got difficulties. But I think we need to start getting buy-in, and I think there is buy-in here at this level, but we need to try and drive it down through our organisations. One of the things when you're trying to change, of course, is influence. We have to influence people, but one of the questions I have is, who do we need to influence? We obviously have to influence within our own organisations, but also to initiate change, I think we need investment as well. So I think we need to influence those in power that hold the financial purses. And that can be a big challenge. But if you're going to try and influence, I think one of the things you have to do is have good communications, and this idea of one voice. Now, one voice doesn't mean one person, because I said this in New York, and somebody said, and who's going to be that voice? But what I'm talking about is one message. One message. So, when somebody asks me, what's the value of official statistics? And somebody asks Gabriella the same question, I think ideally we should be given the exact same answer. I think sometimes we write papers of 10 and 11 pages about the value of official statistics. I'd much prefer 6 bullet points that we can all rattle off, bang, bang, bang. I think it'd be far more effective. And I think the value of one voice coming from all of us in this room, so if your politicians or your policy makers ask you the question, what's the value of official statistics? That the same answer should come from Ireland as it comes from Italy, from Mexico, from wherever in the world. And I think that would really strengthen the official statistical system. That's just my own view. So I found this quote from Robert Kennedy, and he was saying, progress is a nice word. Change is its motivator, and change has its enemies. I think we've all had experience of that. But one of the ways you try and deal with it is we have to remain focused. We have to be absolutely relentless. So I think somebody in my organisation one day said to me, Pádraig, this isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. And I think that we're absolutely right. So you have to be absolutely relentless and focused in what you're trying to see. And we have to address not just the hard, technical, tangible challenges, because technical challenges can always be overcome. The ones that will trip you up are the softer challenges, the behavioural challenges, the intangible, the one you can't touch. And buy-in is not something that you achieve. Buy-in is something you have to work on every single day. And you have to repeat the mantra. You have to become like a broken record, I think. That's just been my experience. Maybe others have a different experience. But I think that that's one of the big modernisation challenges for us. So, anybody wants to get involved? Put your hands up now. No, it's okay. All the outputs of the HLG are up on the HLG website. There are 4 modernisation committees. So obviously with a lot of activities, there's a lot of, well, there's not a lot actually. There's just the 4 structures underneath. There's the Organisational Framework and Evaluation Committee. There's the Production and Methods Committee. the Products and Sources Committee and the Standards Committee. And all of these are doing absolutely sterling work. Incredibly innovative people doing innovative things to try and help all of us. I think that's what it's really all about. So for me, just very quickly, the conclusions. Modernisation means different things to different people, and I think we all know that. There are challenges and opportunities like everything, and the nature of the challenges are varied. But for me, there's the 3 C's. Culture, absolutely critical. We have to address cultural issues. Collaboration, and I think that's what we see here. We're all meeting now regularly every year, and I think the collaboration and the coordination is really strengthening. I've certainly seen a big change. I'm in official statistics 23 years, but I see a huge change in the last 4 or 5 years. This real acknowledgement and acceptance that the scale of the challenges are so vast that we just can't deal with them on our own, that we have to work together. Change is a given. If you always do what you always did, you will always get what you always got. So, and that's true. So change is just, it's not optional. It's going to happen around us. So we either get on or stay behind, and I don't see anybody staying behind. And I think influence is absolutely critical. But my question is, who do we need to influence? I'm not 100% sure about that question. So my final slide is that to the conference, first of all, it's to approve the annual report of the high-level group. Secondly, it's to take note of the formalisation of the statistical modernisation community that I outlined and express your views on that. And thirdly, it's to express your views on how we can continue to develop and coordinate and collaborate at the global level. And if you have any other questions, we are more than happy to take them. Thank you very much.